Welcome to the Stories We Carry, Writing Remembrance, Radiance, and Resilience, with authors Amber McBride, Carole Boston Weatherford, and Sharon G. Flake. Thank you for joining us for this edition of AWP Live, The Writer's Desk. My name is Carla Du Pree, an author of literary fiction and the executive director of CityLit Project, a literary nonprofit in Baltimore. Before we begin tonight's program, I'd like to take a moment to recognize Black History Month, which many of us believe is a 365-day event, and surely not the 28 days in which it is traditionally celebrated. We thank you for joining us today, where we will showcase three exceptional authors whom I will introduce before we begin this conversation. I can tell you up front, I'm delivering a watered down version of their accomplishments. Their collective awards and accolades would fill up this hour, so I'll give you a glimpse. By all means, search out their meaningful work. Follow and support them long after this program airs. Amber McBride is an award winning author and poet who writes for both children and adults, often referring to herself as a folklorist. She is an herbalist, practices hoodoo, an African American folk magic practice, and was an assistant professor for a decade at the University of Virginia and James Madison University before she started writing full time. Her debut young adult novel, Me Moth, was a finalist for the National Book Award and won the 2002 Coretta Scott King John Steptoe Award for New Talent. Her sophomore novel, We Are All So Good at Smiling, was critically acclaimed, garnering five-star reviews. Her middle grade debut, Gone Wolf, won the LA Times Book Award in Children's Literature. Her adult poetry collection, Thick with Trouble, was called a beautiful web of interconnected pieces relating to her identity as a Black woman in the modern era by the Harvard Crimson. Amber earned her MFA with a concentration in poetry from Emerson College in Boston and went on to intern at Furious Flower Poetry Center, in which my wintergreen sister, Joanne Gavin, founded, where she helped organize programs honoring Black poets and writers, including Toni Morrison and Maya Angelou. Sharon G. Flake is the author of the groundbreaking novel, The Skin I'm In, which brought a bold dimension to literature for young readers. Now considered a modern classic, the book is used in classrooms worldwide and studied by experts in education and literature. Sharon has authored over a dozen books with more than 1.8 million in print globally. Her work has been translated into multiple languages, including Korean, Italian, French, and Portuguese. When writing, her goal is to get young people reading with well written, fast paced, character driven novels where they see themselves in print, no matter where they live on this planet. The daughter of a printer, Carole Boston Weatherford, was practically born with ink in her blood. She began writing at age 6 and soon after saw her poems in print. Her 80 plus books have garnered two NAACP Image Awards and 18 American Library Association Youth Media Awards, including a Newbery Honor, Coretta Scott King Award, and 4 Caldecott Honors. Her career achievements have been recognized with the North Carolina Award for Literature, the Nonfiction Award from the Children's Book Guild, and induction into the North Carolina Literary Hall of Fame. She's a retired English professor and lives right here in Maryland. Tonight, we celebrate Black History Month by lifting the words of these award winning authors, learning more about their journeys, their profound new works, and how they came to be the esteemed authors that they are. I want to take this moment to ask each of you to relax. This to feel very much like an informal gathering of Black women talking about words, story, family, and all the things that matter to us, enough to put them on the page. I'm going to ask a series of questions, and while we want to hear from each of you, please don't feel obligated to answer each one. Answer the ones that speak to you and give life to you as a writer. Trust me, we'll make sure our viewers leave with a taste of wanting to learn more about you and your work. Let's start. When did you discover writing was a thing that meant enough to you to spend your life doing it? Did it require validation, or did you audaciously tell yourself that's who you are, that's what you'll be? You didn't require anointment from an outside source. It was what your spirit called for you to do. When did you know?
I knew after I had my first professional publication credit. Growing up, as the daughter of a printer, I saw my work in print at a very early age, before the dawn of the digital technology that we now all take for granted. My dad was a high school printing teacher, and he had his students print some of my early work in his print shop. I did not know at the time that I wanted to be a writer because I did not know that was a career path. I
Mhm.
assumed that the authors of the books that I so loved to read, one, did not look like me, two, were dead, three, were not getting paid to do that work. So I just had no idea that, a writer was something that you could get paid to, a
Mhm.
career, that I could pursue. And when I did figure out that it was a career I could pursue, I, within my culture, it was deemed impractical. So, you better have a backup,
Yes.
So my backup was public relations, but I wasn't even in public relations yet when I got my first publication credit. That was in Metropolitan Magazine in 1980. I was 24 and about to go to graduate school for public administration. How practical can you get, right? And and I had this poem called "I'm Made of Jazz" published in Metropolitan Magazine. I had, of course, submitted the poem, but the magazine had not written to me or contacted me to tell me it was going to be published. So I discovered the magazine with my poem in
Wow.
it at the dentist office, and it completely went to my head. I went on to graduate school. I saw the professor for whom I was going to be a research assistant, and I got a stack of papers, papers. I guess it was some kind of statistical research that I was going to be doing. I can barely remember. And I went to one class, and it took me 2 or 3 months to get up enough courage to tell my parents that I was walking away from a full ride at graduate school to be a poet.
That is so bold and odd, isn't
Yeah.
it?
Yeah. Yeah, yeah, and my parents were so, have been so pleased. They were so pleased about my literary career, so they came around too.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Sharon, Amber?
I think, it's complicated, I think, for me. So I'm gonna jump around when they talk about when you ask the question, was I audacious enough to pursue this career? I would say I wasn't audacious enough to do that, but people don't know that we went to the University of Pittsburgh together. We had a small writing group for a little while. You and Robin Allen, you guys were the bold, daring ones. So I would look at you all and see the direction you were traveling. So early on, you were writing for business publications, Albert French, right?
Yes.
Prominent writer,
Pittsburgh Preview.
writing for a B level uh, national publication. And in both cases, I was like, do you think they'll let me do it? And I got the cover for the B level publications when I got a little bit. Oh, and so I think sometimes people don't always have the courage themselves. And I tell
Mhm.
young people, but there might be somebody traveling that path that you can use as a beacon for a while. So you and Robin were my beacons until I got
Mhm.
the internal courage to sort of figure out my own way. The other thing was I had a scholarship to Highlights Foundation, right? Highlights Magazine used to put on a week long conference at Chautauqua, New York. And going there and being surrounded by writers and editors and agents and all day long for a whole week, I walked away feeling like I can do this. And one
Mhm.
writer said to me, she said, Sharon, really, your gift is not so much picture books, but it's really a YA and middle grade. And that was really helpful because it helped to sort of streamline my focus. When my daughter was born, I wrote a lot of picture books in the beginning, and she's another story. I'll talk about it later. But so those were sort of my pathways to sort of helping me to feel like I think I can do this. And then when The Skin I'm In got published, girl, I was no good at work. I was the
See, there you go.
for the business school at Pitt. And literally, after that got published for 2 years, I was like, I know what I was born to do. I was walking in clouds, and how do I get to do that? And I took a leave of absence for like, I think 6 months, and then came back and say, I think I can do this for a living.
That was bold and audacious, absolutely. And I
Yeah,
remember when you
it was very,
yes, I remember when you started The Skin I'm In, you wondered, "Well, should I talk in this voice?" And it's like, "Yes."
yeah,
I
yeah.
remember that. And look
Mhm.
at you now.
God is good.
That is good. Amber, and
Um,
again, no
um,
forcing.
yeah, I think that I was always a writer. I think I wrote my first poem when I was like 10 years old. But very similar. It wasn't a career path that felt like I could take it. And so I was pre-med at James Madison University for 2 years before I had to make a call to my parents who were paying for my college and be like, so I want to switch to English with a creative writing and African studies minor. And they were like, in true form, my parents are wonderful. My mom was like, okay, we need to write a 10-year plan on what that means and how do we make money as a writer. But it wasn't until honestly I met Dr. Joanne Gabin, the first like Black writer I knew, who throughout my life, but specifically when I first had her as a professor, made me see like there there was a path for me as a writer. And I think we'll talk about it later of like even after I went to grad school, because my voice was like so taken away a bit in my MFA program, that Dr. Gavin again took me back into Furious Flower and like re-helped me find my voice. So for me, it's always been older Black women who have helped me in my journey. And I don't think, similar to what Sharon's saying, I don't know if I didn't see these people that I would think that I could do what I do now. So it's definitely a process.
I love those connections. I love those connections. So I'm one of those readers who won't always remember the details about a book, but I most certainly remember how it made me feel when I closed the book on that final chapter. And I'm thinking of Mama Day by Gloria Naylor, Beloved by Toni Morrison, and that was further down in my writing career. Brown Girl, Brownstones by Paul Marshall, Jubilee by Margaret Walker, The Color Purple by Alice Walker, and a host of Black authors whose work I find favor. One of them was Teacup Full of Roses by Sharon Bell Mathis, very young in my career. What was the first book that swept you away with all that it did and where it took you? And when you knew in your heart you would be a writer just based on those seeing those words in print. And I'm telling you right now, we could probably start a reading list with the number of books we could speak to. But was there one book or a
I will,
character?
I will say it wasn't a book that made me think I could be a writer, but, and this is, it was Angela Davis's autobiography that came out around 74. And I remember reading that like 3 times, just the power and the passion, just her truth on the page, and the boldness and audacity to say what she believed, that this revolutionary on this page. And I wonder, did she impact me at all? I'm not sure, because I just handed in my work to the University of Pittsburgh, and I have a notebook from college. And I tell people, I read it recently and said, oh my God, like, was I going to start the revolution? What the heck? Right? Writing gave me, I realized there was like two Sharon, sort of, even though some people don't see that. I was insecure. I wasn't shy. But when I wrote, I was a whole nother person. When I look at it, I said some stuff that I'm surprised they didn't like say, you got to leave. They might put you out of class right now. But it's a way for young people to express themselves and find themselves. And reading Angela Davis and B.B. Moore Campbell was something.
Yes.
I read Maya, and I read all those other people, of course. But I remember B.B. Moore Campbell, just somebody that wrote about the urban inner city Black people and told brothers and sisters, and 70, what is it, 70-hour hold about her daughter. And those were a little bit later, but that just captivated you and stole your heart. And not always saying, I think at that point I knew I wanted to be a writer. So it was like,
Absolutely.
just those
You made
roots.
me think about people like Intozaki. When For Color Girls came out, everybody realized, wow, you could be bold and raw and
Okay, Carla, you're stealing my answer.
I'm sorry.
That was the book for me. And it was first it was the play, and then I bought the book. I remember going to see the play with my dad. Susanna Beverly was his godchild. Susanna Beverly. I think she was the woman in red, if I remember correctly. And the play showed me that poetry had a home not only on the page but also on the stage. So it showed me that poetry had more possibilities than I had ever dreamed of. And it was empowering for me, to see a play with, all Black women, and their voices, were center stage. So after that, I mean, I was into all the poets of the Black arts movement, but
Yes.
but particularly Adesaki Shange's play "For Colored Girls Who Have Considered Suicide When the Rainbow Is Enough," just it blew my mind. It literally blew my mind.
And part of it, Carole, was because she was so clear about her feelings, what was inside. And she spoke the language of so many other Black women.
Exactly.
And every Black woman was on that stage.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
You could find yourself in one of those characters somewhere. And we'd never seen it before, really.
No. And I had a dog, and I think the dog was really into the book too, because you know how books get dog eared. Well, the book was dog chewed around the edges.
Oh, goodness. For me, I think of a picture book. I think of Tar Beach by Faith Ringgold, which was like when I was a kid and I read that, or my parents read it to me for the first time. It was doing so much. And it was also not working within those confines of, I guess, logic that so many books that don't have Black writers do. Is like, okay, of course she's flying across the city. That makes complete sense. And it made me think that there was endless possibility. And then later on, for me, it was always Toni Morrison as I got into high school and college, reading all of those books. Again, just seeing yourself on the page, because I went to primarily white schools. And so even studying the fact that some of my teachers bought Toni Morrison in the classroom, when my parents had already had me reading her, it was something I felt like I was an expert on. I felt so proud to be able to talk about her. But yeah, the first one that comes to mind is Tar Beach. I have a first edition somewhere in this library. It's like, I'm so proud of it. It's my favorite thing.
Amber, I'm glad you mentioned Tar Beach, because that's actually the book that set me on the path to writing for children. Oh. I discovered it through my children at a library story time. We borrowed the book. They actually fought over that book. They loved it so much, and I bought a copy at Christmas, and it made me think that perhaps I could write for children. I was writing poetry for adults at the time. And of course, she could fly, and I could fly. I flew in my dreams periodically. It hasn't happened in a while, but the book, again, it showed as you said, the possibilities of children's literature.
And the quilting aspect of it was just so culturally relevant as well. It's just everything about it. Like we were saying, like what I see in so much of our work is there's stacking of themes within it that was just exquisite to me.
Very layered, yes. And the crazy part, when I think about all the books that all of you write, when my kids were young, we had to search for books by Black characters. And I remember going to store after store, and the minute I found one, I bought two, just so I could preserve it. But it was very difficult to find stories with Black children. And, you found the Ashanti stories, but just ones with young Black girls and Black boys, it just wasn't a thing. So what you've created over the years is just a fabulous way for families to introduce their children to these books. So, Carole, this question is for you. Your book, Ken, and I have to show this. This Ken, Rooted in Hope, is simply a stunning work of art. But it's so much more than that. I tell people, look at this book, created in collaboration with Carole's son, Jeffrey Boston Weatherford. And I'm telling you now, you're going to want to buy one to read, especially if you read like a writer, and one to treasure. Ken was selected by Maryland Humanities as their 2025 One Maryland, One Book initiative. 15,000 copies were distributed across the state. The Maryland Humanities selection process is rigorous, thoroughly enjoyable, and fascinating, where avid readers read a bunch of books and heartily discuss why they should be considered as a top Maryland pick. Carole, people across the state read your family's story as you researched and unearthed your remarkable ancestral journey. It is a profound reclamation of your roots in ways that are simply breathtaking and honorable. Any family member would want a copy of this book for generations to come. For anyone who has ever begun their search, I mean, Black people searching on ancestry.com, you realize how large an undertaking this is. So, Carole, why was this book so important to manifest and give to the world? Why was it almost necessary to share what you discovered in the process? And at that moment, did you realize that this story, your story, was much bigger than you, that it stood for so many Black families who have yet to unearth their beginnings? And lastly, what did the interior you do to capture the many voices you conjured? The audience, you must understand the level of research and archival dive it took to get here, where the first annotations, I believe, on a ledger dated as far back as 1781, set you on this journey. Tell us about this work, this magnificent work of art that you put together.
I grew up going to the Eastern Shore of Maryland, where my family hails from, not only White House Plantation, where Frederick Douglass was also enslaved, but from the towns, the villages actually of Unionville and Copperville, which my ancestors co-founded. So I was absorbing the history of that place all my life. And it wasn't until my son, got in the industry, we began collaborating, that I started to look for vehicles that we could work on together. And it was actually my agent who asked, is there some Black town that you could write about, kind of like Edgar Lee Masters wrote about the fictional town of Spoon River in Spoon River Anthology? And I said, yes, my ancestors co-founded these villages and I could do that. I let the idea simmer for a few years and then began research in earnest. And it was just, the research process itself was just, anybody who's done any genealogical research into their family's lineage knows that it's just transformative. You don't know what you're going to find out. And everything that each detail that you find out is just, a gem. It's so, so precious, so revealing. And it's a window not only into the past, but into yourself. So, the research process, could have gone on and on and on. But, ultimately you have to write the book. And of course, I did realize that it was not only my story, but also the larger story of African Americans and of America in general. I initially intended to just write about my own family members. But because at White House Plantation, or slave, agricultural factory for forced labor of Black people, there was a community of African Americans, a kin community where many African Americans were related, that numbered 300. So it dawned on me that I could not really do the story justice just by telling the story of my own ancestors, but that I needed to branch out and give voice to some of the other enslaved people at that plantation, and also some of their contemporaries who may have passed through there, like Frederick Douglass, like Harriet Tubman, to create a more complete picture, because what we're doing when we write African American literature in general. I don't care, what genre it is. Whether it's whether it's Afrofuturism or whether it's historical fiction, we are trying to fill in the gaps that we have been left out of stories, and so we're trying to center our stories. And I wanted to to really be to encompass the stories, not only of my own ancestors, but of others who lived at White House, lived and worked at White House, and who were, founding fathers and founding mothers of the United States. So, I felt a great deal of responsibility to my ancestors, but also to, to future generations, to tell it straight and to ask the ancestors to speak to and through me, so that these voices would come out and I could do them justice.
Absolutely. Well, it is a fine work of art. When I say beautiful, I honestly, I'd like a print of this just to frame.
They're for sale. Prints are for sale from
okay. We'll have to make that happen.
Sells his prints, and there've actually been some exhibitions of the artwork as well.
Oh, well deserving.
Thank you.
So, Amber, this is one's for you. Your latest work is a 2025 National Book Award finalist. Praise for the way you capture death, grief, hope, and queer love with a 17-year-old guardian of memories called Gospel, who serves as the keeper. It's a YA novel in verse that covers a span of 4 minutes. When you step into the first pages of The Leaving Room, you quickly remind us you quickly find yourself, I should say, in a place that's completely unfamiliar, a place that stretches beyond one's imagination. In so few words, you manage to make the reader feel as if they're a part of a world so different, but so available to us in the magical way it's manifested. We feel its confinement as much as its release. Think about it. Even the names are compelling. The Keeper of Memories and the Leavers, a place where children come for short periods of time before they must move on, but without their memories. A place where death, grief, love, and hope live on the same page. I was astounded by how quickly I was pulled into this transformational place and compelled by the poetic language and the very idea of it passing what we leave behind. Tell us, it is an extraordinary read. How did you so deftly create a place like the leaving room? And what influenced you to write so eloquently about death, where childhood memories take up residence, a place young people must encounter when they die, along with what happens with the introduction of a keeper named Melody? And I quote, the young are never ready to leave. They need a moment to remember and a keeper to help their wispy souls along.
Well, thank you for that question. I think that this book was extremely difficult for me to write, if I'm completely honest. I guess for me, the idea and the way that we look at death is interesting because I practice hoodoo. I don't really see that death as an end. I see it as like a continuation into a different space. And I kind of wanted to highlight that. But in the writing of it, I had just lost my soul dog, Shiloh, who was 13 years old, had passed away. And I taught at UVA where we had just had a school shooting that took the lives of 3 students. And we were living in a world where genocides are happening as we speak. And I was so just heavy feeling. And I remembered thinking specifically, because I write for young adults, is that any teacher will say, like, every child is filled with so much life. The idea that it would be put out and there wouldn't be a step in between just broke my heart. And so I came up with this idea of, for all young people, and you're like not 18 yet, there's a room that kind of ushers you into death as opposed to the suddenness of it. And what would happen in that room? That person would be loved and cherished the same way their community would love and cherish them. But also with all my books, there's a twist. And so this idea again of there's only supposed to be one keeper of a leaving room. And then suddenly a new one comes in. And what does that mean? Why are there 2? What's going on? Why are we sharing these memories? What are these memories supposed to mean? So it was a book about hope, how to deal with grief in the stages of grief, because it's organized in the stages of grief. And for me, I had to write through that grief of how do I come out on the other side as well. So is an interesting process. And I think that another aspect that I don't think I would have been able to write this book was that this was my 5th book with my current editor, Liz Sabla at Philo and Friends. And it was also the first book that I did not write on, like, I usually turn in full manuscripts because I have such a weird way of like doing things. It was one that I just pitched to her. And I was like, so Gospel's the keeper of a leaving room. And she was like, yes, okay, let's write that book, which I was very surprised by. And so the process of working with her when I got stuck was so helpful. It was the first time I'd ever had like where I was like, I don't know if I'm going to finish this deadline. I don't know how to deal with this heaviness, and then re-going back to like young people and the joys of that and what that feels like. So looking for the joy in that. But yeah, it was a idea which the challenge in it was everything happens in one room, and how do we keep that interesting? And it was a process, but yeah, I think that.
Oh, it was a process, and let me tell you, I love when a poet writes a long book because really the images are just breathtaking.
Thank you.
Breathtaking. And the idea that we don't often talk about death with children, yet they face it all the time.
All the time. It's
and
a reality.
Yes, it is a reality. And the fact that you experienced all that loss and you were writing through it, to me, made it even more powerful because you were tapping into some real life experiences that you could not ignore. That you could not ignore. But thank you. Just the work. I'm telling you the work.
Thank you.
Um, Sharon, this is for you. When we enter Hattie's world, we immediately learn that she's on a journey where she will be other, leaving everything and everyone she loves behind in C County, North Carolina. She sets off to attend Cousin Abigail's school for exceptional girls and meets a girl named Lisa, intent on keeping Hattie Mae in her place. What influenced you to give the spirited Hattie Mae a bigger platform to tell her story? And why was it important for you to tackle the notion of a Black girl placed in an environment where she must be exceptional when she's not feeling worthy, capable, but like she has to earn her keep? Why was that important for you to explore?
That's incredible question, Carla. Thank you. Well, first of all, Hattie Mae Begins Again is the sequel to Once in a Blue Moon, which happens in 1938. And Hattie's brother, James Henry, doesn't really speak to anyone outside the home, doesn't go outside the home because he's sort of holding on to a secret. And his confidant, his companion, probably his savior in a way, is really Hattie Mae, who they travel to space um, in spaceships that they create and pretend. And Hattie says, hey, in order to get past your troubles, you had to go where your troubles began, to the lighthouse
Mm.
under a blue moon. And at the end of it, that novel, she says, I think I'm going to go to I want to go to Philadelphia to our cousin Abigail's school, private school, all Black, um, and probably Philadelphia because I'm from Philadelphia. And Hattie's going to a school where the girls are daughters of doctors and lawyers and architects. I had read somewhere during my research that no one knew when exactly Black people showed up in Philadelphia when they came, but when they wrote the charter for the city in 1687 or 1681, a Black servant was there. Hattie,
Mhm.
Lisa comes from that strain, right? She tells her, listen, there weren't any slaves in my family. I go back to the very beginning. And she wears that like armor, right? And we talk about exceptional girls. I think people can forget because Lisa is a pill. She's not very nice, that Lisa feels compelled to be exceptional too, feels
Mhm.
compelled to be exceptional because there's some trouble in her family that she's not sharing. And so she feels like she has to throw all her cards on the table as to why I am better than you, why I'm higher than you. Doing the research, I found in two different places in the Philadelphia Tribune, and I have to think of the other book, um, that they use the term go back to the farm. So when
Mm.
Hattie Mae, who's coming from North Carolina, who's coming from a farm, um, they're saying to her, othering her, you go back to the farm. But she has her own, she's exceptional in her own way. Her mother's a teacher, her grandmother, she is highly loved where she came from. She does work the farm, but she has her own vision and she's intelligent. And so I hope people will look at that whole thing about the exceptionalism that we expect of girls who come from wealth and means, as well as the exceptionalism we expect from girls who don't have a lot of money. Hattie's not poor, she's rural, she doesn't have a lot of money, but can she be exceptional too? Right? That people kind of compare both of those and look at exceptionalism from both points of views, from where it can be a strain and an expectation and a burden, but at the same time, when you wear it and how it defines you and your history and where you are. And so Hattie Mae, I think, is one of my best characters. I love how she finds her own way, where she is at first making a choice. And I tell people all the time, well, I was just in Philly talking to some young people. I said, she's experiencing what you are experiencing right now. I noticed something in Philadelphia. I probably saw it before, but didn't pay it any mind. A lot of the children, the older ones, were wearing black jackets, coats, overcoats. And I thought, well, that's interesting because it looks like the elementary schools, like they look like they have the freedom to wear more colorful things. And I told that imagine if you're having to make a decision, you've come to a new school, you're going from middle to high school, and now maybe you wore like colorful clothes and jackets, but the culture says that's not what you should be doing. I said, so Hattie comes north to a culture that is saying that's not who you should be. How do you navigate those waters? What parts of you do you decide I will leave my, cow milking parts of me behind and take here? It's also about relationships. Those women, one of my favorite chapters are the women that she sees they're in a club. When I was doing the research, I was amazed at how many clubs people had then. It could be knitting clubs, it could be tennis clubs. Like everybody seemed to belong to a club. And so these women are sitting at this table and Hattie's watching them and she's peeking down at this meeting. And somebody says, come on over here. And what do you want to be? They're professional women. They come in their suits. They're doctors, they're lawyers, they're teachers, they're mothers, but they're there to solve problems as a club that are in the community, to lift people up, to make sure people's rights are instilled. And the woman says, well, what do you want to be? And Hattie says, I don't really know. And she writes down doctor. And she passed the sheet of paper to the next person. Hattie Mae lawyer, Hattie Mae dentist, Hattie Mae teacher, professor.
I love that scene. I loved it.
That's one of my favorite scenes because also them planting seeds into her.
Oh, what's possible? Yes.
Well, it's possible. And it helps to develop. She ends up being a heck of a leader. But it's not just because of them. They are planting seeds in her, just like grand planted seeds, just like mother and dad planted seeds. And it's to say that it's a community effort, it's a culture effort. It's not just one person. So is she exceptional? Of course. Is Lisa exceptional? Yeah. But there are many ways to define what that exceptionalism looks like.
Absolutely. I used to work in a middle school, and the one thing we always said is a child just needs one adult in their lives to push them, to encourage them, to empower them. And it's so important. Now, I have to mention this. Excuse me?
And a good friend, I think is helpful too to navigate those waters. And Lisa ends up having Hattie Mae is that good friend that even though they go through their problems, that helps her open up about what's really behind her stuff and her pain too. So.
Absolutely. Now I want to just share this thing. It's no small thing that the mark you've made, Sharon, on American Letters with the classic The Skin I'm In, having sold over 1 million copies worldwide. March 31st, Hillman Library's archives and special collections at the University of Pittsburgh will honor this extraordinary author with the opening of her archives, where her cultural and scholarly influences will be discussed. I know, Sharon, that was a sway swoon moment for you, this type of recognition. The idea that your papers, your notebooks, your manuscripts, and editorial letters would be examined for years to come. How do you manage that kind of achievement? What was your thoughts when you realized that they wanted your work?
I think about my great grandfather. They said wrote poetry. We don't have any papers or anything, and I periodically I would think he didn't have the opportunity to be published and travel the country and have works all over the world. I think about my mother, my father, my aunt, my grandmother, who sat at the kitchen table in all their houses, and I just listened to them. And I think those were my first storytellers. They didn't just say, oh, Mary walked down the street. It was like Mary walked down the street and she was going boom, 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 boom. I had sound effect. I had people that could define what a protagonist was, even if they didn't know what a protagonist was. And looking back at the storytelling I got. And so I feel really grateful for myself and for all, Carole, you talked about the ancestors, all those people that were back there, just like Hattie Mae, I want to cry, that were planting seeds in me. Here's
Yes.
one in your pocket. Here's one in your back pocket. Here's one up here. Here's one. Here's some seeds in your hair that may not have known. They were just living around us, instilling values and that kind of thing, and teaching us, like I said, always with Langston Hughes and my neighbors and my family, that it was okay to be a little Black girl from North Philadelphia. It didn't matter
Yes.
what the world said. We don't care what the world shows us. Right? We know who we are and where we're going, and so it means a lot too, because, and I'll just say this real fast, Malika from The Skin I'm In is a Black girl from the inner city who speaks African American English, but is all over the world, right?
All
And
over the world. Yes.
a lot of those kids, they're not the favorite children of America. Let's face it, they're just not. And so recognizing that in all of my other characters says something about what people think about, hopefully, those characters and my work, but also future scholars will have to look at it, analyze it, and come to some conclusions about what I think about my growing up years, and how I view Black children, Black America, Black urban centers.
Absolutely. And how important they are.
Right.
Absolutely.
Thank you. Thank you.
So each of you, what is the one thing, or is there one thing or subject matter you haven't written about yet, but when you know that you eventually have to confront on the page? Perhaps even one subject that scares you. What do we need to talk about more? Because, we know stories get aligned with our humanity. Stories make people understand another way of seeing things. It helps us figure out parents. It helps us work out relationships. But is there any subject matter that you want to explore that scares you a little bit because you have to tap too far down? You know how they sometimes say writing, you have to kind of pick a vein and get a little bit
I
deep?
can't think of a subject matter that lies ahead, but when I wrote a book about a verse novel about Marilyn Monroe, because I have to kind of inhabit the character in order to be able to write about the character, I wrote everything in chronological order. Yeah, meaning I tackled each poem, in the order in which the episode happened in her life, except for when she was put on a 72-hour hold. And I was afraid to do that because I didn't want to inhabit that particular Marilyn. So I saved that particular episode for last. And it wasn't as scary as I had thought. Of course, I didn't really, have to live it like she did, but
Right.
I did postpone writing about that particular episode of her life.
And did you feel that you needed to explore it further, or you wanted to get it right, or?
Well, also there had been mental illness. I had confronted mental illness in my family, and so it was difficult for that reason as well.
Yeah.
Because I'd had loved ones. I've had loved ones who had been put on 72-hour hold, so it was difficult for me.
Understandable.
Yeah.
Amber?
Such a good question. I don't know that I have anything that I'm afraid to write. I think that I feel very fortified in my ancestors and everything to get me through anything I have to write. I did write a book called We're All So Good at Smiling about clinical depression, something that I have that was more difficult to write. I think that I do feel a big responsibility to keep writing Black girls and Black women who are across the gamut, not always perfect, sometimes rough around the edges, and start showing that, because I feel like sometimes there's one way that people want to see Black women or Black girls. And so I think that I have to just keep recommitting myself to remembering that whenever I am writing, that the characters don't have to be flawless. They can have plenty of flaws and still be lovable and important and excellent characters. I do really want to write a nonfiction book on hoodoo to give it more understanding, but that would be an undertaking that would take a long time, a research library, and I think that the amount of work similar to, I think, when you were undertaking Ken, is like, I know how much work that will take. So that's the one thing where I would love to do that one day.
Absolutely.
Will that be for kids, Amber?
I think it would be for adults, honestly, in the way of like grading Sweetgrass, and maybe later it could be for young adults. But I feel like the essence of it and the amount of questions I get about hoodoo, especially when movies like Sinners and stuff come out, I would like to do a book. So I'm like, just go to that. It'll help explain the essence of it, because there's plenty of books that have like, this is the herb you use, this is the definition. There aren't that many that get into the essence of how it was created and why it is so prevalent and important still in Black history.
And even the idea, the importance of it right now, because we need to get back to the earth and the healing properties of it, right?
And the assumption that there's a separate, like, I feel like people who are very religious think that hoodoo isn't for them, and hoodoo is a practice. It's not a religion like voodoo. And so like that separating that's happened so much in the last 20 years is very interesting to me on why it's happened, and that there doesn't have to be that separation. So yeah, I get very passionate about it, so I'll calm down.
Absolutely. Well, Amber, you know, we're gonna wait for that book. Okay. That's for sure. That's for sure. So you're all esteemed authors with many awards and accolades, honestly, behind each of your names. In all manner of ways, you've been successful in your endeavors to write. But we know the whole notion of awards is much more complicated than that, isn't it? You know, while it's an immense honor to receive an award, it may come with its share of personal anguish. For instance, as writers, if you don't make the list, does that mean your work is of less value? When you get an award for one book, does judgment show up for the next one if it doesn't cut it? You know, is there ever this internal pressure that comes with each book, and what does that do to the writer in you? And if awards weren't part of the picture, would it invalidate you? It just feels like it can be so messy and complicated, but exhilarating all at once. What's your take on it? I mean, Amber, you came out with your debut book was a National Book Award finalist. It's like, okay.
I feel like it's so interesting, right? Like when you're a debut novelist and you get a National Book Award finalist, get a Coretta Scott King, and then a Morris Award finalist, and it wasn't something you were expecting. Your second book comes along and everything else, if you are in the mindset of awards are important, can feel like a failure, right? Or could feel like a failure to your publisher, or anything like that. And so for me to start out with so many awards, I very early on realized I'm going to have to find a different way to judge if this is a successful book. Because it's not realistic. You're not going to get like that kind of awards for every single book that you write. And so for me, it was more of connecting with my audience, talking to young people, and writing something I was proud of, because it can get in your head, and also to keep writing. So one thing I did was Me Moth came out, and my next two books were already written. So like I didn't have to worry about that writer's block. Because I had written drafts of these books before I even got awards for my first book. And so that was helpful. So then getting to my next book, I had much longer time because the other ones were already drafted. And so just constantly still writing, not holding that to a standard, and trying not to get in your head about this. And I say this before, is like, I have a lot of awards. I've never made any list as far as like bestseller. And there's people who hit bestsellers and they're like, oh, I wish I had awards. And once again, it's not something you have control over, so you can't obsess over it. Yeah,
it is a slippery road.
I'm glad you pointed that out, Amber. About awards do not necessarily translate into spots on the bestsellers list all the time, particularly not for African American authors.
That part.
One reason being that when the awards are given or announced, the publisher may not have even ordered enough copies of our books to meet the demand. And if you miss that moment, it's just not gonna, it's not gonna be on the list. Yep. But you can't live and die, on the sword of awards. And so what I try to do is, one, never expect awards, no matter how many people tell you that's gonna be, that's gonna get, be a Newbery contender, that's gonna be, on the Mott Caldecott list, and the kids and Miss Flake's class voted for your book to win the Newbery. You just can't. That's nice, but you have to keep awards in perspective and maybe focus more on rewards.
Mm.
So that's what I try to do.
Well, you know what? I never thought about. I'm sorry, Carole.
Oh yeah, okay. One of the rewards is knowing that kids whose schools I will never visit, whose faces I will never see, are reading my books and being impacted by my books, and perhaps becoming change agents in their own environments. Another reward is knowing that my books do double duty. My nonfiction books do double duty, teaching not only the kids who are the intended audience, but also teaching the adults about topics that we were not taught in schools. And so when you teach a teacher, you're teaching generations. It's not just one kid, it's multitudes. And then the more personal reward, of course, is getting to work with my son and, collaborating with him because it gives me an excuse to call him.
I love that. I love that.
I never thought about awards. I really didn't. Okay, that's nice. And I just kept writing until I got stuck. And I'm not going to go into the whole big of it all. I never stopped writing, so I was still writing. I just slowed down. I got some feedback from a editor mid-career that I didn't think she liked my work. And that sent me spiraling. There's a lot to this, but I'm just doing the shortened version. And I was working on the book Penned, and we took it to another house, and I took it from 200 pages to 400 pages, and then we went to another house, and then I had to get rid of 200 pages, and then I did start thinking about. It took me so much time and energy, 5 years, really. I'm like, I want an award. I want a big award, and I couldn't really shut down my head. And then I ended up going, and I think it was God. One day, a voice just said, you need to find somebody that works with people who are stuck. And I went into online, and it was somebody, lo and behold, that worked with athletes who were stuck in Pittsburgh. And I went there. And the one thing she said, like, I'll tell you, like maybe the second visit, the one thing she said was, what can you control? I was like, what? Right. It was like, oh, I can't control whether I get awards. I can't control whether the editor is going to like the book or the agent is going to want to shop the book. I can only control that I sit myself down in that chair and I write. And that really freed me in a sense. And after that, I wrote Once in the Blue Moon in the Life I'm In. But the voice would sometimes I would think, I would freeze a little bit because I have my little anxiety, right? And I would say, what can you control, Sharon? Exactly. Only that I show up. And I never stopped showing up. I had never stopped showing up. I was still always writing, but I couldn't shut down my head. And so now, again, I don't look at awards that way anymore. And it was this blip because I had never, my daughter even said, but Mom, you never even talked about awards. But I think I almost needed something as a value. I put in so much work. I need something.
I want some validation.
But again, you don't control that. And you can write the best book and get all the awards and sell millions and not get the awards anyway.
Absolutely. We have two more questions, and one's coming from the audience. Do you ever feel you're being haunted by a character, like an ancestor who wants their story told? And how do you use your energy to help you write?
Well, I don't want to use the verb haunted, but perhaps inspired. Billie Holiday is my muse, and I really can't remember whether I knew that she was my muse before or after I wrote the book, Becoming Billie Holiday, which covers her first 25 years of life and ending when she recorded the song Strange Fruit. But afterwards, I gave the book to a roommate, a former roommate. We were 20-something and roommates in D.C. And she said, girl, I know you channeled that. And she put her hand up and we high-fived. I said, maybe I did. And I think I did. And so it was at that point that I became aware of the ancestors speaking to and through me. Because when I worked on the book, it was almost, I was a diehard Billie Holiday fan from like the time that I saw Lady Sings the Blues, the movie. And I had been exposed to her music even before then because my dad was a Billie Holiday fan. So when I when I wrote the book, I listened to her music again, did research, but I didn't listen to her music while I was writing. And it was almost as if she was whispering in my ear and humming in my ear as I wrote. So, she's definitely my muse, but she didn't haunt me.
Okay. So I have this question to ask you.
I think to haunt me.
So I want you each for a moment to return to that young writer in you, and the writer that held doubt and hope in the same breath, the one who didn't always know where the story was going, or the one who faced many a blank page with a heart full of wonder. What would the present writer say to your younger writer self if you had to write her a letter? Dear Amber, dear Sharon, dear Carole, what would you say to her?
2 words, dear Carole, write on.
That's nice. I would think I would say, because I compared myself a lot early on, dear Sharon, you don't have to compare yourself to anyone. You are enough.
I think I would say, and it kind of goes off the question we just had, dear Amber, be haunted by your ancestors. I think haunted means a little bit different, like a very comforting kind of thing, at least in my experience. And I think I used to be a bit more frightened by it. And now I've kind of embraced it. So I feel, much like you were saying, I feel like some books are just downloaded to me. So being open and not being afraid of my own voice and the voices that I feel like are coming through me.
Absolutely. In some ways, I don't know when you start to write a book, if the character comes to you first or an incident. But sometimes stories show up because you get this little whisper in your ear and you can't let go of it, or something that keeps returning to you. And the biggest thing is, I think Carole said, was to, show up for it. Be ready to write the story. And we have to keep writing our stories, don't we? We simply have to. Is there anything else?
Somebody else will write it for us,
Right.
Yes. And they might write it the wrong way.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And we can't do that. So we've come to the end of, I'm sorry. What'd you say, Carole?
That's why I tell people, don't, you meet people all the time. Like, I've been thinking about a story for 15 years. And I'm like, you're not the only person that story might be God might not give him that to one person. It could be out there. And so if you don't get it, if you don't grab it and do something with it, then somebody else will be used to do it. It might not be told the same way, but the intended purposes can be met. So,
yeah.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Well, we've come to the end of our program. So thank you for joining us for AWP Live, The Writer's Desk, and a special Black History Month edition. Please show some love to these fabulous authors, Sharon G. Flake, Amber McBride, and Carole Boston Weatherford. Thank you for this time together. Keep books alive and these writers' names in your mouth. I'd like for you to buy their books, attend their readings, follow them on social media. And as Toni Morrison would say, buy books by Black authors, since that's how we'll keep writing and telling and sharing our unique, vastly different, and incredible stories. I'm Carla Du Pree with CityLit Project and AWP. I hope you enjoyed sharing this moment with us at AWP Live, The Writer's Desk. Please remember, it's up to you. It's up to us. Buy a book, read a book, spread the word about a book, and what I honestly believe, build your own home library. And for those writers listening out there, from our heart to yours, let writing be your revolution. Thank you for joining us tonight. Thank you, ladies. I appreciate every single one of you.